Welcome to everyone watching and listening online this morning. We are so blessed that you are gathering with us in this time of worship. It's all about Advent this time of the year as we get ready for Christmas, and the theme of this third Advent Sunday is joy. Merriam-Webster defines joy as an emotion that evokes well-being, a sense of well-being. At church camp, we used to sing, "I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart." Do you remember that old song? On Christmas Eve, we're going to gather, and Christians around the world are going to sing, "Joy to the world." Joy. But then when we look at the world around us today that seems kind of dark, kind of hopeless, kind of joyless, how do we as Christians experience joy in this Advent season? We have violent groups and even individuals threatening the lives of innocents around the world and even close to home, and it's been countered with the most unusual, unorthodox rhetoric on how to deal with it, and then there's all the endless opinions on how to address and solve this entire mess. So if we focus on our world and on our human condition, it's really difficult to find any joy in this current situation. But what if we focus on God instead? Do you recall when you were young? Say when you were 12 years old, the joy that I hope you experienced in your life. When I was 12 years old, it's been a while, but when I was 12, it was a very joyful time to be alive. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album has just been released. Star Trek and a TV show called The Monkees were two popular television programs. The very first heart transplant had been successfully completed. Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman was the must-see movie that summer. And even though the Packers beat the Chiefs 35-10 in the first ever Super Bowl, ouch, the St. Louis Cardinals beat the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. Yeah, it was a good year that year when I was 12. What brought you joy when you were 12? Let's think about Jesus. Let's think about the boy Jesus when he was a mere 12 years old. Scripture doesn't tell us a lot about the boy Jesus, the teenage Jesus, about his life as a teenager. What do you think he did to have fun? What brought him joy? We know that he didn't have a computer. He didn't have an iPhone. He didn't have access to the internet. He didn't play soccer, didn't play basketball, didn't play football, didn't play tennis. He didn't hang out with his friends at the mall. He didn't go to a water park, didn't go to an amusement park. What brought him joy at that age of being a 12-year-old teenager? Because we really know very little about the teenager Jesus. The only real clue that we have into his adolescent life we find in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, where it describes, "Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover for the Jews. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. And when the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents didn't know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey without Jesus. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends, and when they did not find him, they returned back to Jerusalem and searched for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions, and all who heard boy Jesus were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, 'Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I, we've been searching for you with great anxiety.'" She might have had more words to say, but that's all that's in the Bible. And so Jesus said to his parents, "Well, why were you searching for me?" Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. And then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all those things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. My mom raised 10 kids. Yeah, you heard me say it right. 10 children. And she had this uncanny ability to attach an invisible string between herself and any of us kids anytime we were in a crowd. So whether we strayed off at a park or when we went to a museum or the St. Louis Zoo, sooner or later, she could locate the lost one and bring him back to the fold. It was a remarkable. However, we do have a family story. Don't we all have family stories? We have a family story of one time when one of my younger siblings got lost in a very large department store. And the separation caused great anxiety in my younger brother, who began to cry and then began to wail until at last my mother found him and began to console him. And when she asked him why he was so upset, he said, "Because I thought you had left me." And here's the end line that we even repeat to this day. My mother said to him, "You know that I would never leave you." And we repeated that line through the years. That time Mom said, "You know I would never leave you." So imagine Mary's heart when she realized that she had left her precious son behind somewhere in Jerusalem at Passover. Now, before you think, well, how could Mary possibly do something like that? They were in a huge group. Back in those days when you traveled from one community to another, especially at Passover where thousands upon thousands of people would be traveling, you traveled in numbers for safety because there were thieves and bandits on the roads. And so you would travel in great numbers, so they leave. They're heading back. I can just imagine Joseph saying, "Okay, everybody, now that we're here for Passover, here's the temple, so when we get ready to leave, we're going to meet here at the temple. And we'll make sure everybody's here before we head home." And so they have the Passover celebration in the great city of Jerusalem. And when it's time to leave, they all gathered. No doubt Mary and Joseph saw Jesus standing there at the doorway of the temple. And Joseph is like, "Let's go, let's head home." And the huge crowd of people would have gone through the gates of Jerusalem. They would have been so excited. They would have been talking about everything they had seen and heard, the people that they had met. All was well until the evening, nearly a day's journey away, when Mary, it would have been Mary, the mother, of course, right? She begins to wonder, "I haven't seen my boy." She says to Joseph, "Joseph, have you seen Jesus?" Joseph would have said the typical fatherly response, "I thought it was your turn to watch him." Don't worry about it, he's probably with his buddies, not a big deal. But Mary would know at that moment in her heart, right, moms? Mary would know that precise moment something wasn't right. And so she began to worry. And Joseph, to console her, finally said, "Okay, this is what we'll do. It'll be all right. We'll turn around. We'll go back to the city. We'll search until we find him." And so they turned around. They went back to the great city of Jerusalem. And they searched to no avail. They searched one day. They searched 2 days. Oh my, they searched on third day. Mary had to be beside herself, frantic. And she and Joseph finally say to one another, "Well, where did we see him last? Where was the last time we saw him?" And they both would have gotten wide-eyed and go, "The temple." They hadn't looked at the temple. So they went to the temple, one of the largest buildings in Jerusalem. They walk up the grand entrance, they walk through the doors, and there, sure enough, is their teenage boy, Jesus. And he was sitting with the most revered Jewish teachers in the temple. And they were in deep theological conversation with this teenage boy. Now imagine the joy. Imagine the joy in Mary's heart. Her son was safe. Her son was all right. There wasn't a scratch on him. Here is her teenage Jesus sitting in the temple, Sitting in the temple, and she moves from joy to astonishment because he's sitting with the most educated of teachers. And he's not just listening, he's asking questions, and he's responding to their questions. And the teachers, these Jewish rabbis, were amazed at the incredible depth of spiritual, theological knowledge coming out of this boy. And then Mary's maternal instincts kicked in as she goes from joy and astonishment to admonishment. How dare you not stay with the family? I can imagine the Jewish rabbis all rolling their eyes, right? But there was this boy Jesus looking at his mother, and he says, Mother, why would you have searched the city for me? Would you not have just figured out I'm in my Father's house? And at that moment, that exact moment, everybody, Joseph, Mary, the rabbis, the teachers, the onlookers, they all had to be astonished by his reply. Jesus wasn't discovered wandering around the streets for the observance of Passover, this high holy time, nor was he sitting in an outdoor cafe chowing down on food the way you expect a teenager to do. And he wasn't even with his teenager friends in the city. No, he was in church. He was in his Father's house. And so, my friends, when we become separated in our lives, physically, emotionally, spiritually, from the ones that we love, when we feel spiritually abandoned and alone, when we feel like we need to have a safe place, a sacred place to call sanctuary, shouldn't all of us be discovered in God's house? And shouldn't we be in prayer and conversation with others in God's house, experiencing the joy of God's love for all of humankind? Where else should we be, right? Jesus was in the temple that day for those 3 days because it never occurred to Jesus to be anywhere else. So, where are you this morning? I mean, we're all in the sanctuary, we're in this church, you're in your home or wherever you're watching or listening, but I mean spiritually, where are you spiritually this morning? You know, we're spiritually in God's house, right? Don't you feel like when you come to God's house that you draw near to God's presence in a very sacred way, and there's no other place you want to be at this moment but in God's house? Does the notion of even being in God's house bring you joy? I don't know about you, but when the outside world seems dark and uncertain like it does right now, when the whole world really seems to be spiraling out of control like it does right now, isn't this the place we should come for comfort? Isn't this the very place that we should discover wisdom and strength to carry on, where we say, God, I trust that the greater things that are happening are because of you, God. I trust that it'll be okay. I have hope and I have joy, knowing, God, that you are ultimately in control. And we discover joy by being in God's house. So may this be the moment that you realize that God invites you to be in God's house, that God desires to be in relationship with you. And we believe that it's really all for the glory of God's name that our Heavenly Creator gave us the gift of Jesus, sinless and unblemished, to redeem us, to save us, to liberate us, to deliver us from ourselves, from our sin, and from the darkness of this world. As that ancient hymn reminds us, oh, how marvelous, oh, how wonderful, this our song should forever be. Oh, how marvelous, oh, how wonderful is our Savior's love for thee.